Yes, and we are live. Good Friday morning, everyone. Hopefully, you can hear me. I'm still checking my audio. I have to do this every time because I need to make sure that the audio is going through because every once in a while it doesn't. Welcome to this week's episode of the Practical SQL Server HADR show. I need to put on my notes right here. Take notes. I Here's the thing though, you kind of learn a lot of different things every week. Part of our jobs as technical professionals is you grow, is you have to learn on a regular basis. There's new technologies being introduced. You got to learn some of these things. And sometimes it is overwhelming when you're learning a lot of these things. And the best way for you to learn quickly is to focus. Yes, focus. The reason I say that is because sometimes you just listen in the background and all of a sudden the entire whatever it is that you're listening to, whether it's a podcast, a webinar, an online course, or anything, and then an entire session passes by and you forgot everything. Why? Because you're not fully in tune. And one of the reasons I highly recommend you go ahead and grab a pen and paper so you can uh, write notes. The best way for you to really learn is to take notes, not in the form of text or your phone or anything, because we always carry our phones with us all the time, and people would take notes using their phones. I have found that because all of us are really in tune with our phones, it doesn't help reinforce learning. So I went back to good old pen and paper, and that's why I still have my notes. In fact, what's interesting is I have collected, I think, about half a dozen notebooks from years writing and journaling and taking notes, because this is a really good way to reinforce your learning. Anyway, the topic of today's episode, that was a quick side segue, because again, I wanted to make not just SQL Server high availability and disaster recovery practical. I want to make sure that you are getting a ton from these. It's not enough for me to just talk about this and then you listen and say, hey, it's okay. And then all of a sudden you forget, right? I want to help you reinforce what you learned, because this will definitely help you make managing, designing, implementing, even troubleshooting always on availability groups or any SQL Server high availability and disaster recovery solutions effectively, right? So here we go. Say hi on the comment section. Today's topic is all about problem solving, and the thing here is this: the one thing that I like, one thing that drew me to the tech world, IT, is the fact that it's all about solving problems. Whether you're deploying a new solution or dealing with something that's repetitive, like for instance, oh, is the backup job successful or not? Although it's not really a good measure of whether your backups are working just by looking at the SQL Server agent jobs that run the backups. If they run, people assume that they're okay. And again, the one thing that I really like about working in tech is the fact that we get to solve problems. I mean, no offense to the most people who just do uh, paperwork. Sometimes, yeah, it's a little bit boring for me. And same thing with you. I'm pretty sure one of the reasons why you went into a tech role, whether you're a sysadmin, a DBA, or any tech work for that matter, is you like the idea of solving problems. You get so excited with trying to deal with a challenge head on, putting a lot of effort, analyzing the problem, and eventually having the solution that would solve the problem. And you take pride in the idea. That was me. Like, for instance, you decide to deploy a stretched cluster across two different data centers, and you have like an availability group replicas, and seeing that it is something that you built makes you proud of your accomplishments. And not to mention, of course, when there's some issues, for instance, that you are trying to fix, problems that you're trying to solve, it feels good knowing that you found a way to solve the problem. However, and this is something that I wanted to emphasize throughout this episode, is the fact that because we have been accustomed to solving problems, technical problems, that is, there are pitfalls that most of us fall into. And I was this more than a decade ago. The way of solving these problems, because you know how it is when you become really, really good at what you do because it's been your normal. Like, for instance, you exercise, your body becomes used to the weight, and then all of a sudden it feels normal for you that you don't pay attention to it anymore. And because we are accustomed to solving problems day in and day out, it becomes problematic. And this is actually the title of the session, is how your problem solving skills can cause more problems if not done right. And I put it in a keyword here, if not done right, because anything could be misused, even something as good as solving technical problems. And I see this a lot, especially when I work with my customers, where I get brought in, solve a specific problem, when I knew just by observing and talking to the people on the team that they have the skills, they have the expertise, they have the capabilities to do what they brought me in to do. So it's really not about the lack of skills, the lack of experience. And even so, when you don't have the experience, when you don't have the expertise and the training to do what you need to do, it becomes even more overwhelming. And like I said, I have seen a variation of people have the problem solving skills yet could not solve a problem because they fall into these I want to say traps, or what's the word I'm looking for? We all did. I used to be the person who would try and solve the technical problems the way I see fit, not realizing, oops, it's causing more problems. Like, for instance, this is a classic example that I've seen, especially when I was supporting uh, customer environments running SharePoint databases. The databases are growing. The LDF file is growing exponentially. You'll see an LDF file with about 70 gigabytes size, whereas the MDF file is about 1 or 2 gigabytes until it grows to about 20. So the LDF file is 3 or 4 times the size of the MDF file. So the problem was, okay, we're running out of space because the LDF file is there. We'll just, oh, somebody forgot to do a log backup. They take a log backup and then they shrink the LDF file because they're running out of space. And this is, again, a typical example of how your problem solving skills can cause problems down the road if not done right. And this may seem like something that is to our advantage because, again, there's a reason why you are getting paid more because you are working in tech. Technology has become the backbone of how business operations work. Businesses rely so much on technology. And so we play a very important role as technology professionals in making that happen. And so we are getting paid more compared to other people who work in different industries. But also, it comes with the responsibility of being able to solve problems quickly if done correctly. So I want to talk about the 3 things of how your problem solving skills can cause more problems if not done right. The first one, and again, hopefully you got a pen and paper ready so you can start taking notes. First one is your problem solving skills can cause more problems if not done right when you constantly refer to past experiences of how you solved the problem before. Here's the thing. We have, as you're learning new technologies, you would find new ways on how to solve problems. Like I just mentioned that example earlier, the LDF file taking too much space it's 4 to 5 times as large as the MDF file. And when the LDF file fills up the entire drive, your database starts behaving as if it's a read-only database when you don't even do anything about it. What do? Oh, we don't want to cause issues with the SQL Server database. And so you trim the log file. You take a log backup and then shrink it back. And you see this work one time, you find evidences that this has been the way that people, in your case, you managed to solve this problem of the log file growing. Not realizing, of course, that in the future, whenever you see something like this, oh, one database has an LDF file that is 4 to 5 times larger than the MDF file. The way you would solve that problem will be based on your past experiences of how you solved that problem previously. And in fact, this is something that is part of our training as technical professionals. You go to computer science programs, computer engineering, IT programs, and they'll tell you, you have this problem, this is how you solve it. And you build that pattern, you build that habit, right? I remember one time when I was working on, first time I was introduced to my role as an operational DBA was the ticketing system. What I was told was that if this is a recurring issue, make sure that you look at the ticketing system, look at how it was solved back then, and then do just exactly that. It's interesting because when you start to think about it, if the problem kept recurring, then we're not actually solving the problem, right? I will point into that later. But when you start to think about it, when you are simply solving the problem, but it keeps recurring, it means it's still there. It keeps recurring, right? But then you are conditioned in a way, whether it's at work, whether your education, to solve a problem the same way you've solved it in the past. Your past experiences become the reference point of how you solve those problems. When you do that, you get sidetracked about why is this recurring in the first place? You feel good about the fact that you managed to solve the problem by either an answer that you found on Stack Exchange, a response from Twitter from somebody who has solved this problem before, and then they suggested that you try it. And now you have evidences, you have proof, you can now put that solution on your ticketing system that says, this was the problem, this is how it was solved. In fact, when you look at KB articles, nothing wrong with KB articles, but when you look at KB articles, this is the problem, this is the symptom, this is the workaround, or this is the resolution. We are being conditioned to solve a problem the same way. And so when you start seeing a problem that's similar, that has the same parameters, your default instinct or your default response would be to solve that problem the same way you've done it before. And this is, again, a byproduct of how we are hardwired as human beings. This is also a byproduct of how we were conditioned either through education or either through training or either through how processes are at work. And again, we are all about efficiency. We're all about productivity. And that's why if this is what, again, we immediately have a solution the minute we can see what the problem is. And that could cause more problems if not done right. So that's the first thing. Having the past experience dictate how we solve problems today, even if they're the same problems that we've solved in the past. Having, again, I want to take a minute here or a second to really let that sink in. Because, like I said, whether you're doing operational support, you're building an availability group, you're designing a high availability or disaster recovery solution, you will always look for things in the past that is somehow similar to what you're doing right now. And then if you find evidences, you find facts, if you find remnants of how you've done it in the past, that's immediately how you would go ahead and solve that problem. Which leads you to the second reason how your problem solving skills can cause more problems. The second reason is that because of how you immediately respond with those previous experiences, it becomes a pattern to a point where you're now too zoomed into the problem. You become so close to the problem that you forget to look outside of the problem. You get so zoomed in, you are too close to the problem that you forget to look outside of the problem. And I never understood, and this goes back to a couple of years when customers would come in and help and ask for my help. And one of the questions I ask is, so why do you need my help? You have the right people, they have the skills, they have the talent, they have the experience. You have everything that you need in order to solve this problem. Or when they're building a solution, they want to bring me in despite the fact that it's already built. And the response that they give me is something that I had to think about for years. I didn't realize what it was until somebody explained it to me. They bring me in as a second pair of eyes. That's not because they don't trust their engineers, that's not because they don't trust the way the system was built, that they are not confident enough. It's just that when people are so close to the problem, they don't get to become objective. I forgot what the term was, but when you're so close to the problem, you have all the baggage that comes with being too close to the problem. I've had cases with customers where the database team could not solve a problem, mainly because their way of thinking about who built the infrastructure, let's say, for instance, somebody took care of building the VMs that would run the server so that they can load SQL Server and run the database off of it. They have this way of thinking that the sysadmins who built the VMs are not confident to follow Microsoft best practices, and that's why they're having all of these sorts of problems. And so they are bringing with them, just like what point number one is, they're bringing with them experiences from their past. In this case, it's not about solving problems, but all the baggages that they carry with them when they're now faced with a problem. And I was like, okay, so that's one of the reasons why people would bring me in as a consultant and look at their infrastructure. It's not because they don't trust their people. They just want a fresh new set of eyes with no baggage, with no history of how this thing was done, and with no reference point other than bringing somebody who is not part of the team, does not have uh, any reasons to please everybody and make somebody happy, or not step on anybody's toes, but to simply look at the infrastructure, evaluate it, and say whether it's okay or not okay. It's the very reason why sometimes you go to another doctor, not because you don't trust the first doctor, but because somebody's asking for a second opinion. And this gives you the objective view of what the problem really is. Like I said, I've seen this happen so many times when a client would come in, they would say, we want you to look at it. But they have the people, they have the skills, they have the talent, they have the expertise to build it. They just want a fresh new set of eyes to look at it objectively. In addition to that, remember, first point was that you have the background and the experience of solving this problem in the past and making it easy to solve the problem now based on the information, based on the knowledge you gained, based on the experiences you've had. And so you will solve the problem the way you've dealt with it in the past. When it's a new problem, you'll research a new way and then use that And if it works, you put it on your arsenal of tools on how to solve the problem. That also leads into, again, point number 2, where because you're too close to the problem, you're so what's the word I'm looking for? I'm getting blank today. You are so close to the problem to a point that you can't think objectively. There will be cases when the people who built the infrastructure, who deployed the solution, have attachments to their quote unquote babies. I don't know why they call them babies. They're so close to their children that anything that would be totally, I don't want to say against, but anything that would be totally outside of what their understanding is as far as the solution goes, they don't entertain. Let's say, for instance, a senior DBA built this massively large, complex architecture, and it's causing a lot of problems. And he knew that what is causing the problem is the architecture. Yet he's not entertaining the idea that the design needs to be re-architected or the infrastructure needs to be re-architected. But because he is too close to the problem, he built it, he has his reputation at stake, he's got his name on the line, he asked for budget from upper management, and now everybody's telling him that he needs to redesign. It's just like telling the person he's been wrong all the time. And that's the challenge with being too close to the problem. You don't get to be objective enough to be to really look at it the way it is and approach the problem with a fresh new set of eyes and a possibility of other ways to solve it. Right? I think I've dealt with so many outages and problems and issues in the past where somebody did the infrastructure, somebody built it, somebody designed it, to a point where they would start to blame the person. I said, he only did what he knew was right during that time, given the limited understanding, limited experience, and limited training that he has. As far as he is concerned, that was the right thing to do, and I don't blame him for that. You would do the same. You would design, you would implement, you would solve the problem the way you thought was right, given your amount of information, your availability of experience, your training, your expertise, and you would do the same. But when you're too close to the problem, you don't get to be objective to look outside of the problem, right? So that's the second one. You're too close to the problem. The third one is you're more conditioned to solve symptom problems. I call them symptom problems because, like I said in the beginning, when I used the example of a large LDF file, which could potentially cause issues with the database availability, we are conditioned to solve for symptom problems. If this is what happens, this is how you need to solve it, without looking at the root cause. I'll use this as a challenge. Go and look at questions being posted on some of the websites available, like Stack Exchange, the Microsoft Answers. I don't know what the other websites out there where you could post questions, even in a mailing list, news groups. I don't know if news groups still exist. LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Facebook groups, on any platform. See how the question is posted and see and observe how people respond to the questions. And this is, again, I was that person back then where I would respond like, yeah, just do this. I've seen this 100 different ways. I've seen this multiple times. This is how you solve the problem. And then they would solve the problem, but then it's only the symptom that they're solving. It's just like saying, and I like using the medical analogy because it really drives the point. It's just like saying, oh, my legs are aching. Maybe you put on a cold or hot compress without realizing you have severe muscle issues that you need to deal with, not with hot or cold compress. Maybe you need to go see a doctor because surgery is needed for that case. We have been conditioned to solve for, or not solve, but immediately see symptom problems and solve them quickly, because we need quick wins. We need, and part of that is also the drive for efficiency and productivity, getting stuff done quicker so that people can give you more stuff to do, right? When you're conditioned to solve for symptom problems, you may solve the symptom problems, but then underneath, if you're not solving the real problem, then you're causing more issues. I remember there was one case that I worked with a couple of years ago where it was an availability problem. Their always on availability group, their failover cluster will come online. It's a 2-node failover cluster with a file share witness, and they knew about the quorum. They knew about the concept of when you lose majority of votes, the cluster will take itself offline, including the databases in the available groups. Sure, they knew that. One point, they lost their entire failover cluster. They found out that there was some issues with the file share witness. They replaced the file share witness. Well and good. Same thing happened a couple of weeks later. Cluster went offline. They lost quorum. Found out that there was some issues with the file share. And so what did they do? They replaced the file share witness. They went through, I think, 4 or 5 different highly available servers, clustered file shares, just to replace a file share. Not realizing, though, that there were some issues with the network. They didn't realize that the real issue was with the network, and that's why the cluster nodes can't talk to each other. It cannot access, both nodes could not access the file share. And this, again, is an example of when people like us deal with issues at the surface level. The symptom problems, as I referred to, is it will cause more issues. In their case, they had to go through like 5 different highly available file shares or clustered file servers just to see that it wasn't really that. The real problem was the network. Because again, the way they've done it in the past is they tried to resolve the problem by replacing the file share witness with something else, made it work, problem would go away, but then kept recurring, right? It is challenging to start thinking of this in a different way when you have been conditioned to do and solve the problem the way you've done it before. It takes taking yourself out of the equation sometimes, letting somebody look at the problem differently, and then letting go of preconceived notions of how you've solved it in the past, all of your experiences with how you solved this problem before, even what was written in your ticketing system history about a specific case or a specific problem. Of course, we see patterns as data professionals and tech professionals, and as human beings, we see patterns. But then just because patterns exist doesn't mean that they will always be that way. And this is interesting because, again, as technical professionals, we rely on data, we rely on patterns to effectively solve problems faster, more effective, until we realize we're not really solving the problem. We're just masking the real problem because we're trying to solve symptom problems. So how do we deal with this? Because, again, you are in IT, you work in tech, you love working with SQL Server databases, and that's why this is the work that you do. But if you're telling me that the way I solve problems is causing more problems, how do I fix this? We love fixing things, right? Again, you're in tech because you love solving problems. How do you deal with this? And there is no silver bullet that you follow steps 1 to 5, because again, what would be a problem today when it recurs in the future may not have the same parameters. Maybe you have more replicas in your AG now, you have more databases in your AG, yet you're still working with the same number of CPU cores, same number of same amount of memory, same IOPS for your drives, more databases, more replicas, more AGs, yet the compute, storage, and networking resources remain the same. The way you solve the problem might not be useful anymore. So how do you deal with this? The one thing I've found that allowed me to solve problems, the real problems, that is by looking at the problem, right? Looking at the problem and redefining what the problem is. This goes into the depth of understanding what is the root cause, what is really going on, right? Of course, that also assumes that you have the luxury of time. Because when you have a very tight SLA, your recovery point and your recovery time objective is within, hours time frame, you cannot afford to redefine a problem and take your time, right? Outage causes more issues down the road that you have to deal with it. But when you have the luxury of time, let's say, for instance, you are looking at a problem, try and take a step back. Look at the problem and see, how can I redefine this? How can you redefine this? It's interesting. I'll use an example of how the smartphone came to be, and I use that example because it's really smart. No pun intended. Prior to the very first iPhone, we already have a smart device. They call them the personal digital assistants. HP iPac, anyone? I had my O2 XDA phone back then. That was before the iPhone. Before the iPhone, we have MP3 players. The Sony MP3 player was a thing. Before the iPhone, we already have phones. That's where Nokia and Motorola were very famous for. Yet, Apple decided to redefine this piece of device. It's not an iPhone. This piece of device was looked at as a phone, a personal digital assistant, in some case with an internet browser, a document processor or word processor, and a phone. What Apple did was to redefine it and say, you now have a music or an MP3 player, a phone, and a personal digital assistant in one device. That's all they did. They redefined it, because back then you see new versions, new models of the Nokia phone, the Motorola phone, the Sony phone, every new versions. It wasn't until Apple redefined what this device really is that they managed not to solve one problem, but they solved multiple problems to a point now people cannot live without the smartphone. And so this is the power of redefining problems. But it does require that you take a step back, let go of all of your preconceived notions of how the problem was solved in the past, let go of the problems or the backgrounds, the parameters that you've used in the past. Again, of course, this is assuming that you have the luxury of time, because in an outage, I only have one goal in an outage: bring the databases online as quickly as I possibly can, regardless. That's my ultimate goal. But if you do have the luxury of time, you can take a step back, let go of every preconceived notions, and look at the problem and see if you can redefine it. Like, redefine what the problem is. Every innovation comes from looking at the problem, not solving the problem, yet redefining what the problem is, and they started to thrive. Same thing, and this goes beyond just dealing with, my servers are not responding and my databases are not online. Or I'll just use a query, for instance. So this is how I've done it in the past. Now I can't seem to make it work. It takes taking a step back, looking at the bigger picture, and trying to redefine the problem and see it differently. I used to volunteer for kids' church where I would ask kids to do a very simple exercise. I would give them I'll just use this. I'll give them a small piece of paper like this, and I will ask them to have or make a hole using this small piece of paper where 25 kids can go through. 25 kids. You can use that as an example too. Um, and you would see how kids would like, are you kidding me? I can't even, fit my fist in there. That was my intent at trying to mimic kids' voice. I cannot even put my fist through that piece of paper, and you're telling me that I can create a hole using this small piece of paper and let 25 kids through. And the thing is, because we all have a preconceived notion of what a hole is, how to make a hole, how to create a hole, it comes with it the baggage of the limitations that prevent us from seeing the possibilities. And like I said, this is part of how you should practice your problem solving skills. Some people would call it lateral thinking, where you would literally have someone look at the problem differently. And it's interesting because the ones who succeed and who are really, really good in tech are the ones who don't have a tech background. They have a philosophy background. They have an economics background. They have a degree in their medical background, because they do not have preconceived notions of how this problem is solved in the past. They bring in their creativity, and then they solve the problem with using the things that majority of the people don't see. It's just because they're putting on a totally different set of lens when they're looking at a problem, and they start to see it differently. That's why they are redefining it differently. Hence, the solutions that they come up with blow people's minds. I'll wrap up with this. There was a client a couple of years ago where we were working on doing a lift and shift. They have a 3-node Windows Server failover cluster with a 3 replica availability group, and they have it on premises. It's all physical machines. They want to move it to the cloud, Azure specifically. But when they did the math, it became cost prohibitive for them to do a lift and shift. And so I asked the question, why do you really need this? Why do you want to do the lift and shift? Oh, because this is the infrastructure that we've been using, and this is used for this. And I think I use the 5 why questions. You hear me talk about the 5 why questions because I don't know, it's fascinating. When I was a kid, I used to annoy people by asking the why questions. 5 why questions. They have a response, I ask why. They have another response, I ask a follow-up why, until we realize that the reason they built the failover cluster with the 3 replica availability group was simply to have availability during that one time within a month, just that one time within a month, a 4-hour maintenance window, where they could do anything they want. They could replace the hard drives or hardware. They could take down one of the replicas, fail over and do anything, database code deployment. One time within the month that would cover 4 hours when they're doing the regular maintenance. When we were so clear about that, we ended up not doing lift and shift, but doing something that they never imagined. And that's the power of looking at a problem differently with a fresh set of eyes, letting go of all your preconceived notions, and just redefine what the problem is. You will be surprised at the possibilities and all of the different ways that you could have solved that problem. That is about it for this week's episode of the Practical SQL Server HADR show. Action item. I'm huge on action items, especially when I'm working with my clients and the people who go through my training programs. Action items. Look at recurring issues in your environment. Look at them. You may have, I'm pretty sure you have a ticketing system. Look at the recurring issues in your ticketing system and have a look at what are those. How were they resolved in the past? And during your thinking time, hopefully you do have some thinking time, look at the problem. How would you solve it differently? How would you deal with it differently? And then list down all the different ways on how you could deal with the problem now that you have this new perspective on it. All right. My bad. Join me again next week for another episode of the Practical SQL Server HNDR show. And if you need help with anything that involves SQL Server high availability, maybe you're designing and you're planning to deploy an always-on availability group or even a failover clustered instance on premises on the cloud, and you need help, reach out. Use that link on the screen, schedule a strategy session. Let's have that conversation. Or maybe your team is now responsible for managing a high availability solution. Your vendor deployed it, you've cut over to production, but your team is not ready to fully support it and you need help. Use that link on the screen, schedule a strategy session. Let's talk. And if there is anything I can do to help you achieve those goals, I'll be more than willing to do that. If not, I will still steer you in the direction that would best serve your needs. Again, use that link on the screen, schedule a strategy session. Let's have a chat, all right? Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Enjoy, it's Friday. Whatever it is that you decide to do on a Friday. Enjoy the rest of your day. I'll see you again in the next episode. And watch out for future episodes if you're on YouTube. I think there's a subscribe thing there. I don't even look at that. If you're on LinkedIn, make sure that you are just put a schedule on your calendar that this happens every Friday, 10 o'clock Eastern time. Make sure that you put that on your calendar so you don't forget, right? Again, enjoy the rest of your week. And for some people, Friday afternoon is already a weekend doing barbecue, especially now that summer is just around the corner. I will see you again next week. Goodbye.